the finest speakers and a great erudite and a legendary name in the domain of tourism research and academia. But before I go ahead and introduce him, let me just remind you and ourselves that to make the most of this session, let us remember whilst we are participating in the session that the participants' mic would be muted and videos would be turned off. Please post your question in the chat box. Time permitting, these questions would be taken up during the question and answer sessions. Please your full name, official names if it be. Please fill in the feedback forms given as a link at the end of the session. Open up your cameras during the digital photo shoots whenever that would happen. That would be asked for. We would request for that. Now let me just start with off. Here's Professor Hall. He is an exemplar academic who combines the perfect knowledge of the books, the vision, and is often seen discussing the present, the human aspects, and the creative points to guide the discourse on sweeping areas in tourism. In 2009, he was named the winner of the Elsevier Science Direct for Great Thinking in Arts and Humanities and Social Science category. So you can understand how great a thinker that we have in our midst today. It's a wonderful session that is going to happen. For those of us who have known him and are very much awestruck at his legendary academic feats, for his prolific research writings and the humongous citations that these have garnered for his writings, we are so very much awestruck. He's a legendary to us. And for those who are new, the new initiates, we have got lots of students joining in, the scholars who are new. So let me read it out for the benefit of you all, just because it is also hard for me even to remember what all he has done. And I'm happy to introduce to you the legend himself. Professor Colin Michael Hall is the distinguished RI Professor of Marketing and Tourism in the Department of Management, Marketing and Entrepreneurship, the School of Business, University of Canterbury, Christchurch, New Zealand. He is also currently visiting professor and docent in geography, University of Oulu, Finland, a visiting professor in tourism, School of Business and Economics, Linnaeus University, Kalmar, Sweden, guest professor, Department of Service Management at Lund, Helsingborg campus, Sweden, visiting professor CREATE, that is the Center for Research and Innovation in Tourism, Taylor's University, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He is the most cited scholar as per the Google Scholar in tourism research, almost somewhere around 85,000 of citation. Probably he's still garnered more citations by the time we are speaking. Professor Hall is also a frequent visitor to the geography department, Umeå University in Sweden. Prior positions in Australia he has attained was in New Zealand and elsewhere include professor in tourism at University of Otago, professor of tourism and service management at Victoria University of Wellington, visiting professor at the Sheffield Hallam University, UK, and Center for Tourism Studies, University of Eastern Finland. Honorary professors, he has been given the honorary professorship as well in the Department of Marketing, Stirling University, Scotland. He has honorary doctorate from University of Umeå in Sweden, Oulu in Finland, and Lund University, Sweden. So his current research is focusing on the degrowth, environmental change, resilience, disaster response, especially in relation to earthquakes, floods, heat waves, climate change, biodiversity loss, behavioral interventions for sustainability, social marketing, regional development, sustainable foodways, halal food and hospitality, World Heritage tourism and public transport, active transport, servicescapes, walking, and privacy issues in tourism and hospitality. Before I invite him to deliberate on today's topic of enterprise and entrepreneurialism in tourism and hospitality, the need to go back to basic, that's the topic of the day. May I request the chair of the conference and head of the department, Dr. Sarah Hussain, to welcome Professor Collins. May I now invite Professor Sarah Hussain. Please do the honors, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Professor Hall, on behalf of the Department of Tourism and Hospitality Management, Jamia, Millia, Islamia, I warmly welcome you to this conference and to this session. And I would just like to add in here that we are very grateful to you that at the last minute, at such a short notice, you were ready with your keynote address, and that really means a lot. And as we can see, there are really enthusiastic scholars and teachers who are here to listen to you. So over to you, Professor Hall. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. And as is the norm these days, we've had a few technical problems, so bear with me. I will carry on speaking. I think I sent the PowerPoint through if we're in desperate straits. But as with all these things, the most important aspect actually isn't the PowerPoint. The most important aspect in terms, as you all appreciate, in terms of learning from each other is listening. And so I hope you don't mind, but for the next few minutes, I'm going to have a talk. And you don't really need even to see the PowerPoint. In fact, I find sometimes when I teach, and maybe some of you find this as well, there's so much focus on the PowerPoint, they forget that you're there. And I'm very much here. And again, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. To me, in terms of the topic, as you can tell, I think there's a need to go back to basics. And that's because we are at a very challenging time, whether it be in business and tourism or just being humanity. I think there's a lot of attention being given to being smart in tourism, but being smart in tourism to me is not about the technology. It's understanding the big picture and understanding people and understanding yourself as part of that. I think what happens at the level of the firm is very much affected by the macro or the big settings we have of government and institutions, and also of destination image and marketing. We are often very much constrained by that. And it's something which I certainly appreciate. And in an Indian context, I think it's vitally important to understand that small businesses are very much constrained by what happens at the national level, if we're thinking of India. Because what the international tourist sees isn't that local level. What they see is what is reported at the national scale. And what is done in terms of incredible marketing campaigns like Incredible India may be offset in the international market by right-wing zealots and Hindu nationalists in terms of the very poor image at times they give India in many markets. And I'm not having a go at Hindus or any religion. It's one of the realities of trying to understand where we are in business. And I think that often requires an honest appraisal of the overall situation. We therefore need to see the big picture. And I want to think and concentrate in particular about innovation. I want us to think about entrepreneurship and what it means. Because what happens at the firm level and at the individual level is connected to what happens at that bigger picture. And what are we innovating and being entrepreneurial for? Is it related to firm survival? Which I think is always a very interesting question, because if we're being brutally honest, firms also rise and fall. Would business be better at times by allowing some firms to fail, especially some large ones which otherwise get state subsidies? And it's small business which is so important. How do we support small business? And to me, it means understanding that bigger dimension and posing that question. We are wanting to be entrepreneurial and innovative, but for what reason, for who, and to what end? Because when we look at the big picture and the influences on entrepreneurship and innovation, it means situating tourism within a much bigger picture. What does it mean in terms of policy? What does it mean in terms of infrastructure? What does it mean in terms of the innovation system? And as all of those factors like that affect what individual entrepreneurs can do. And to me, it's critical. And to be thinking about that in all seriousness, about understanding how we fit into that bigger picture and considering those aspects. What do they mean? If we're looking at those, what we might call macro settings, how do we understand that in terms of innovation, institutional arrangements? What are the institutional arrangements specifically for tourism? In many countries, tourism policy and tourism innovation policy is actually not very good. It's very limited. Other sectors get much more attention, even though in one sense they don't employ so many people. And tourism itself is often poorly understood by politicians. And that is a major challenge. But if we're trying to understand entrepreneurship and innovation, we need to understand where we sit. Where are we embedded? What is the place in which we are located? Because that is the system that surrounds us. And how well do we understand that in terms of a destination context or a regional context? Entrepreneurship and innovation is intrinsically localized and territorial. We are embedded in place. Destination is about place. We are about place. We are from somewhere. We connect somewhere. The most resilient businesses are the ones which have the strongest connections to place, whether they're formal or informal. It's the social capital, to use the academic jargon, or it's our friends and relations, to put it in reality. It's our community which is important. That is what sustains our business if something goes wrong. Because we can switch, we can depend on each other. And it also means, and for me, if we're trying to place entrepreneurship and innovation and entrepreneurialism in that bigger picture for tourism, what is important actually is the bigger picture. You cannot have a viable tourism industry unless you have a viable society. You cannot. It doesn't work. Your environment, your social environment, your well-being of your people is what makes up your tourism industry. It's not outside, it's not separate, it's part of us. And that is critical to understand in terms of long-term success, but many governments don't. And that's why places which have that very strong community context are often have very good long-term viable businesses, because those businesses are generally part of the community. We also have to understand that there are many, many entrepreneurial innovation value points in any tourist firm. And you can often ask people, what is your business model? Do you even understand it? What are the networks and alliances you have? How do you design your service? Do you even think about it? What is your service strategy? There's often a lot of focus these days on distribution and technology, but that's only part of the picture. It's a small part of the picture. You have to understand the wider context of your business and all those particular points of, we can use the word intellectual capital, being smart about it in terms of knowing how your business operates. What are the little things you can change or alter to satisfy your customer more? How do we understand that? And also, as part of that, how do you understand what you're trying to do? I actually think there is a huge gap between what is often taught in business schools, and I work in a business school, and the reality of entrepreneurship. Why? Because many businesses are actually not about profit maximization. They are about satisfying your family and satisfying yourself and being viable that way and satisfying your customer. In fact, there are many businesses which in much Western literature are referred to as lifestyle businesses, which I think is appalling, which actually are about people who are great entrepreneurs, but who do not want their business to get too big. Why? Because they want to spend time with their families, while still satisfying the customer, while still making money, while still being good people. And to me, they are the funnest entrepreneurs of all. And interestingly, in tourism, I would argue that the vast majority of businesses are actually structured like that in terms of numbers of businesses, but they're often not the ones that get the attention. They're not the large hotel groups, or they're not Air India, or they're not any other airline. I'm not picking on Air India, but you know what I mean? It's that issue of tourism is made of small businesses. So let's understand what those small businesses owners really want. And I think that's really critical, because that means if we're trying to understand entrepreneurialism and how we respond in terms of these major challenges like COVID and economic crisis and climate crisis, these are the things we need to understand, because these are the things that motivate businesses and motivate individuals. But that then also means understanding how their goals are related to how business offer is designed and how tourism is designed. And I always find this fascinating, because it means to me thinking about firm survival and what really influences it. We know that the longer a firm is around, the longer it will be around. You know, the older the firm is, it will continue to exist. Size does matter, and it's very difficult for smaller firms. In tourism, we have great issues with seasonality, how we respond to that. But in fact, I actually think that from an entrepreneurial and business strategy perspective, our understanding there is very weak, because to use a phrase of my now deceased colleague Neil Leeper's approach, many tourism businesses are actually partially industrialized. In other words, their customers are not just tourists. If you think of a restaurant, and hospitality in particular, your customers are not just tourists, they are locals. What is the balance? And you may well have different strategies for each of them. But if I read many of the tourism books, that's never mentioned. And in fact, if I read many of the hospitality books, that is never mentioned either. Yet that's one of the realities of this. I love those businesses, those restaurants and hospitality businesses, and I am sure there are some in your communities which are as much about feeding your local community as they are about feeding the customer. And that's part of their business strategy, and that's part of what makes them great businesses. But if I go read most of the textbooks, you won't see that. But to me, if we think about entrepreneurialism, it's critical. Embedded in your community, embedded in your place, and making that place part of what you offer, because that is what visitors, if we are talking visitors, come to see and come to experience. But it is also what makes a place livable for the people that are there and embrace their businesses. So, you know, if we're trying to understand entrepreneurialism and survival, it isn't just about that business. It's not. It's about the bigger thing. It's about where we are. It's about our faith communities as well. And that is something which, you know, I get, as you can tell, I get frustrated when I talk about this, because it's just not there in so much of the Western literature that you get, and somehow gets carried on to students, which I think is terrible. We often talk about it like this, but I honestly, it's one of my great frustrations as someone who's so interested in halal and hospitality. It really frustrates me to see that bigger picture. And that's why, in terms of thinking of survival, thinking of being smart, thinking of being genuinely entrepreneurialistic, they are the kind of things we have to consider. And if we are thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship, again, pose the question, what are we being innovative and entrepreneurial for? What are we trying to achieve? In some cases, it may be revenue, market share, productivity, it may even be reducing costs. All of these are factors. Increasingly, this is also about reducing our energy consumption and environmental impact. All of those things are important to consider. But it means fundamentally understanding you and your firm, your business, understanding how you are organized to add value, both for your consumer and for yourself. Because as an entrepreneur, if you are not adding value to yourself, you will be very, very disappointed. And, you know, I'm sure you can appreciate that. So adding value isn't just for the consumer, it is for you and your families and your communities. But then relate that back to the notion of the destination, relate it back to how you connect with other businesses. By all means, being smart in tourism, as I keep repeating, is not about technology or the latest smartphone. It is about connectivity, but it means not seeing yourself in isolation. It means embracing others and understanding your different points of connectedness. So, if we are going to talk about virtual tourism, I know it'll be a conference topic. I'm going to say a couple of things. As you can already tell, I think technology is overrated. Why? Because is it really going to be a point of advantage if everyone's using the same technology? And I think it's not. It's just there. It just exists. I think virtual tourism has its place, but a big question, how will it be monetized? And in fact, I actually think the rush by some to embrace virtual technologies and the so-called metaverse prevents new opportunities. And what is the opportunity? To be authentic, not to be a virtual facade, not to be online, but to be real. Being authentic has long been a theme in tourism. It's a wonderful theme. Being yourself, showing yourself to God and to your community, being yourself. To me, that is so important. And as part of that, that then means that being authentic and being yourself is probably your major source of entrepreneurial advantage. It means not ignoring smart tourism, but being smart, going back to the basics. Think of how you fit in. Think of sustainability, think of community. And if we think of community and going digital, we also know that the more we've gone digital, the more people have become lonely. That's why being authentic is so important, genuinely embracing people. And I know that COVID makes it difficult, but that is the response I think we need in terms of being entrepreneurial in a way that is satisfying to ourselves and to our customers. So to conclude, obviously what I'm saying to some may be quite heretical. I'm not going out and saying you should go buy the latest computer technology. I'm not saying you should go virtual. I'm saying you should be yourself. I'm saying what's really important is connecting with community, having good business practices, understanding the big picture, understanding the consumer and the customer, and understanding what you really want from your business. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going out and making lots of money. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what do you want? If you want more time with your family and you want to have a genuinely satisfying life, we all know that money will not bring you everything. Being a successful entrepreneur, I think, is also about having good life balance and having that connectivity to family, friends, and community. If we don't have that, then I think we have huge problems. So being smart, therefore, takes us back to real basics. It means focusing on the basics of good business and good personal practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, sir. I cannot agree more. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time prior to getting into this academy. And I think you have nailed it, sir. Every point of view, whatever you said, has a relevance. And down to the earth, I can say for sure, making it very authentic is such an important thing. People do not connect if you're not authentic. And of course, if you're really not putting it for yourself, then there comes a point wherein you are out of the system again. You are not in sync, neither with the family nor with the people. You are not yourself then. So of course, technology is overrated. I also agree for that, sir, because just part of it, most of it is what you give to them. How do you connect with them? If it is from far away, people won't come and travel there. It would be only a virtual world. So of course, it's everything. So it has to be back to basics. And thank you so much, sir. It has been wonderful hearing you. I had little understanding that academia is bereft of the real feelings of what goes in the mind of an entrepreneur. But I have to change that view and say yes. There are people who think a great deal on it, and they are really connected with that. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to ask any question, you can write it down on the chat box and we'll convey it to Professor Hall. And you can see why he's a legend. Why he's a thinker, one of the thought leaders of our time. Don't get scared, please. Yeah.
Why a viable society? Because we're part. It's easy. We're part of society. If you haven't got a viable society, you do not have a viable business. I think to me that's just so important, and that's why businesses need to contribute to society and encourage a viable society. I think one of the things to me is so important is to help the poorest in society. Our society is only as strong as our poorest member. Unless we care for our poorest member, I think it's awful. It's one of the reasons why, and I don't want to preach, one of the reasons why I've always been so interested in Islam. Because charity is essentially part of the religion. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And to me, that is such an important thing to embrace. Genuine people embrace that. And that's why it's so important. And in fact, I think we see that in COVID. Your strongest societies, and with those which respond best, or regions that respond best, are those which looked after the poorest.
हमको ज्वाइन कराना है ना, नेक्स्ट टाइम का भी शुरू 10 बजे शुरू करेंगे. It's already time.
There's another question out here. Bali as a community shut. What happens next?
I think that's an interesting one. I think Bali, to an extent, shows one of the problems of just concentrating too much on tourism. I mean, to me, a viable destination and good tourism is having a range of different markets, and in some cases, having alternatives to tourism. And I think it's one of the problems when we speak from a tourism perspective. We often speak too much in isolation, and that's why I always talk about the bigger picture. What else happens in the community? What is the connectivity between other sectors and the tourism sector? What happens when either one of those industries or tourism has a problem? I think Bali will survive. Bali will come back. But it's like all these things, it's time. I'm getting older now, so I tend to see time in much bigger perspectives than someone in their 20s. And I think, this may be controversial, but I think also people have got really bad at having patience and seeing the big picture. And I'm not saying that as some Westerner, I hope. I'm saying it's me, in that I think that's why having a viable community is so important, because in these situations you depend on each other, you look after each other. And I think Bali will come back. But what's important, and it is the community. It is the community which is important.
Thank you so much, sir. I know that we can go on and on. And it would be our good fortune to have you here in India once everything opens up, and so that we have your great insights. We'll definitely, we'll reach out to you for that. But nonetheless, it's been so much great to have you here. As ma'am said, despite this the little time that we had given you, but you made it a point to come in, and we definitely are very, very grateful for that. And not only that, everybody has benefited from your insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. All my blessings to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.